Bueno, siempre es como, siempre es bueno iniciar el tiempo con una palabra y con una pequeña oración. Y he elegido en Apocalipsis, dice Apocalipsis 3, 11 al 13. He aquí yo vengo pronto. Retén lo que tienes para que ninguno tome tu corona. Al que venciere, yo lo haré columna en el templo de mi Dios, y nunca más saldrá de allí. Y escribiré sobre él el nombre de mi Dios y el nombre de la ciudad de mi Dios, la nueva Jerusalén, la cual desciende del cielo de mi Dios y mi nombre nuevo. El que tiene oído, oiga lo que el Espíritu dice a las iglesias. Amén. Amante Padre Dios, te bendecimos, te alabamos, te damos gracias por esta oportunidad que nos permites reunirnos en tu nombre, Señor. Padre, sé en este tiempo con cada uno de nosotros, Señor. Padre, dirigiéndonos a través de tu Espíritu Santo y manifestándote de manera especial. Toma tú la dirección, que tu Espíritu Santo sea, Señor, tomando el control de cada uno de nosotros, de quienes están dirigiendo, de quienes van a tomar la palabra, de toda la audiencia, del tiempo, del ambiente, de tu palabra, que tu palabra, Señor, podamos apropiarla en nuestros corazones y que el adversario no tenga oportunidad, Señor, de quitarla. Padre, estamos delante de tu presencia antes y primeramente recono- reconociéndote a ti como nuestro Señor, nuestro Dios, Señor, de este tiempo, de esta reunión. Nosotros deseamos, queremos que en este tiempo seas tú glorificado, que tú, Señor, te glorifiques. Ese es nuestro anhelo, ese es nuestro deseo. Padre, esto es para tu gloria, para tu honra. Bendice este tiempo de manera especial. Padre, es un tiempo para ti. Es un tiempo para ti, para que tú, Señor, a través de estas enseñanzas, Señor, continúes dando más conocimiento para que podamos, Señor, seguir trabajando en la expansión de tu reino y a la vez manteniendo el objetivo, Señor, de alcanzar las almas para ti. En tus manos estamos, Señor. Te queremos pedir también de manera especial por el doctor Miller. Gracias porque ha dispuesto también de su tiempo para estar con nosotros y poder facilitarnos estas enseñanzas. Sé con él, dirígele en este tiempo a través de tu Espíritu Santo. Padre, que seas tú, Señor, tu palabra dicha a través de sus labios, Señor, que sea de edificación para cada uno de nosotros y de enseñanza, y que podamos apropiarla en nuestros corazones. Padre, bendice a cada uno de los que a Váscar también bendice y te damos gracias por Aniel, por el doctor Jorge Papatián, por el doctor Jorge Pinzón, por Lorena, Señor. Gracias por Megan, Señor. Gracias por cada uno de los traductores. Padre, gracias te damos. Oh Señor, estamos en tus manos. Estamos en tus manos. En el nombre de Jesús y te damos gracias, Padre. Amén y amén.
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 Pues muy buenos días para todos. La idea es que hace unos 2 meses larguitos, 3 meses, hemos estado compartiendo con ICMA Latinoamérica. Entonces quisiera hablar algo importante de lo que es ICMA. ICMA es la Asociación Internacional de Médicos y Odontólogos Cristianos a nivel mundial. En Juan 13:15 dice, resumido, dice, os he dado ejemplo para que hagáis lo mismo que yo he hecho por vosotros. Ningún siervo es mayor que su amo, Pues queremos seguir los pasos de Jesús y Jesús enseñó muchas cosas mientras estuvo aquí y nos enseñó y parte de su enseñanza es lo que queremos replicar. ICMA es una asociación internacional fundada en el Reino Unido hace más de 50 años. Tiene un objetivo principal, que es seguir los pasos del gran médico, el médico por excelencia, el Señor Jesucristo, quien vino, Dios, despojado de su gloria, se hizo carne y nos enseñó un ritmo de vida y nos habló sobre la salud integral, no solo sobre la salud física, sino integral. Y él mismo envió a sus discípulos a predicar el Evangelio y a sanar a los enfermos, como está en Mateo 9:35, en Lucas 9:2 y en otros pasajes. ¿Cuál es la visión de ICMA? Sencillo, es ver un testimonio cristiano a través de médicos, odontólogos, en cada comunidad de cada nación. Y la visión y la oración que está haciendo es por muchos otros países, especialmente la constitución de un grupo en Ecuador, aquí en Colombia y en otras partes del mundo. Y que podamos impactar a cada comunión con el mensaje de Jesucristo, pero con un mensaje no solo hablado, sino vivido a través de nuestras vidas. La misión de ICMA es iniciar y fortalecer movimientos médicos, odontológicos, y yo creo que de todo el personal de salud cristiano, a través de 4 bases, 4 pilares básicos que tiene ICMA para la misión. El primero es el llamado, y es permitir que los movimientos nacionales cristianos dialoguen dentro de sí mismos y entre sí sobre temas relevantes en sus contextos seculares o otras religiones, desde una base totalmente conformada en 2 principios, que esa base sea bíblica y que sea ética. Lo segundo que hacemos es el equipamiento. ICMA se encarga de equipar, capacitar y construir las perspectivas, la comprensión cristiana y el testimonio de médicos, odontólogos y personal de salud y aún estudiantes para liderazgo. Necesitamos líderes cristianos, de profesionales de salud, para impactar nuestras comunidades en todos los países. El tercero es compañerismo, a través de plataformas, a través de los congresos que se hacen mundiales o locales, es reunir a miembros en compañerismo a nivel regional, internacional y otros niveles para apoyarse mutuamente a través del estímulo mutuo, la oración y el aprendizaje. Y parte de eso es lo que nos une en esta mañana a todos nosotros, compartir este compañerismo. Y por último, el servicio. Es cómo iniciar y fortalecer misiones para todos, especialmente para las comunidades vulnerables, a través de asociaciones entre movimientos nacionales de personas de la salud cristiana en todo el mundo y ojalá en cada municipio, en cada departamento. Esto es básicamente lo que impacta la Asociación Internacional de Médicos y CMA. Y es lo que nos une hoy, en esta mañana. Damos gracias por la vida del doctor Calum Miller, por la forma en que Dios le ha preparado, por el dinamismo de él, la disciplina de él. Y en esta mañana el tema que nos compete es el aborto, la verdad sobre la evidencia médica y ética. El Salmo 139, versículo 13 dice, porque tú formaste mis entrañas, tú me hiciste en el vientre de mi madre. Te alabaré porque formidables, maravillosas son tus obras. Estoy maravillado y mi alma lo sabe muy bien. Qué bueno poder entender que el principio de la vida depende de Dios y no de actos humanos ni de actos legales. Y ahí mismo, desde donde constituye la vida, desde la concepción, el Señor nos ha formado cada parte de nosotros. Esta mañana tenemos el privilegio de estar con el doctor Miller. Quisiera hablar un poquitico de su amplia historia de vida, no podríamos hablar de todo, pero tan solo 3 cosas básicas. El doctor Miller se graduó hace 9 años en la Universidad de Oxford. En este momento trabaja como médico en el Reino Unido. Enseña filosofía en la Universidad de Oxford, donde la investigación se centra en la política del aborto en la práctica. También tiene una maestría con distinción de estudios bíblicos. Ha participado en más de 40 presentaciones académicas a nivel internacional y ha participado en múltiples debates contra el director ejecutivo del proveedor privado de aborto más grande en el Reino Unido, el PPAS. Ha publicado en importantes lugares académicos sobre una gran cantidad de temas, por ejemplo, la mortalidad materna en el mundo en desarrollo, la ética de la votación sobre el aborto, el dolor animal y fetal, el aborto y la salud mental, el aborto por telemedicina, la libertad académica y la filosofía de la religión. Ha recibido premios de la Universidad de Oxford y del Royal College de Psiquiatría por su trabajo sobre bioética. Y creo que todo esto es lo que nos da la gran oportunidad y el gran privilegio de contar hoy con su presentación, una persona muy competente, muy capacitada, con un conocimiento y una experiencia básica que hoy nos va a llenar nuestra mente y ojalá nuestro corazón en un tema tan importante. El doctor Miller ha realizado presentaciones ante gran cantidad de profesionales, parlamentarios de todo el mundo. Aparece regularmente en los principales medios de comunicación del Reino Unido y ha sido invitado a hablar ante muchos grupos de profesionales, incluido la Asociación de Obstetras y Ginecólogos de Uganda. En este momento estamos orando por 3 grandes libros que él está preparando, los cuales tendremos prontamente. Pero no solo eso, sino que ha dado muchos webinars a nivel mundial, especialmente una que llama Reduciendo las tasas de aborto. Y tiene su blog, ese blog que si alguien quiere entrarlo, ahí está la dirección del blog. Bueno, y vamos a entrar ya al tema. Les voy a pedir un favor, en el chat, en la parte de abajo, pueden escribir las preguntas allí y al final de la conferencia seguramente haremos claridad a algunas de estas preguntas que se hagan. Y lo otro importante es que hay una traducción simultánea. El doctor Miller va a hablar en inglés, pero si ustedes miran en la parte de abajo de la sala, de la pantalla, está esto, y ahí donde dice interpretación, ustedes pueden hacer un clic y escoger si la quieren escuchar en inglés o en español. Eso lo pueden hacer de una vez porque en este momento vamos a dejarlo con el doctor Miller. Doctor Miller, por favor, y bueno, muchas gracias por él y por Megan, que nos va a hacer la traducción. Muchas gracias. Megan, ¿le puedes decir al doctor Miller, por favor?
Okay, thank you. Well, let me just share my screen quickly and then, okay, hopefully you can see this. Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this talk on this very important topic, which I know has been hugely controversial in Latin America, all across Latin America over the last few years in particular. We've seen Argentina vote to legalize abortion in the Senate, in the legislature. In Colombia and in Ecuador, we've seen the courts legalize abortion, also in Mexico. And in Brazil, right at this moment, as many of you know, the court is trying to basically legislate without the legislature to legalize abortion. And so I know that this is a really huge topic, particularly for Brazil at this moment. And so what I want to do is equip you with some of the facts that can be useful talking about this issue with your colleagues or your friends or with anyone else. Maybe even some of you have the chance to speak with decision makers and legislators who might be wanting to change laws on this. So thank you for taking the time today. So I want to show you the map at the moment. This is abortion law around the world. So red countries and yellow countries are countries that currently protect the unborn child in the law, and blue countries are those which do not protect the child in the law. So you can see that Latin America is particularly divided at this point, with even some very ambiguous legal situations. For example, in Mexico, the Inter-American Court on Human Rights is also currently trying to potentially legalize abortion for the entire of Latin America through a case in El Salvador. And so, again, it's really important that people with a conscience, people with values, stand up for those. It's important that you don't just give up and let the court do what they want, but that you make your voice heard to judges, to legislators, and to anyone else that might be seeking to undermine the Christian values that most of Latin America is built on. So this can change very quickly, and of course, it's a big debate for all of you at the moment. So how can we think about this topic as Christians? Well, a place I like to begin, I'll come to the Bible shortly, but I want to give this quote from Martin Luther King, who said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Whatever affects one person directly affects everyone indirectly. What he's saying is that when injustice occurs, we cannot just ignore it and pretend that it's in another part of society. It affects all of us because we were all created in families and communities that depend on each other. Now, nobody knows this better than a mother looking after her child. Any parent knows that when your child is hurt, you hurt as well. That's just part of what it means to be a parent. And so the pro-life perspective just says the same principle when it comes to abortion. It says when the unborn child is hurt, the mother and the family hurt as well. And I'll give some evidence for this from medical science and the rest of sociology. So the pro-life perspective rejects this narrative that it's a battle between the mother and the child and that we have to pick one to support. There's a narrative that pro-lifers support the baby and pro-choice or pro-abortion people support the mother. But this is not true because the pro-life message is fundamentally based on the principle of equality. And so it says that both the mother and the child are created in the image of God and they are equally and infinitely valuable. And so we have to protect and love both. And we can do that by opposing abortion because abortion is harmful to both of them. So the pro-life perspective says that both of the lives in the pregnancy matter and that women deserve better options than abortion. Now, it's important we talk about this topic with compassion as well as with truth, partly because it is so common. In my country, there are 200,000 abortions every year. In the United States, there are 1 million abortions every year. This means that 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in abortion, and 1 in 3 women has an abortion in their lifetime. So we have to speak about this knowing that it is so common. And so we have to speak with compassion. Now, in pro-life countries, such as most of those in Latin America still, the abortion rate is lower, but it does still happen. And of course, in many countries in Latin America, the law has now changed. So where can we start from a biblical perspective? Well, there are just a few passages I want to share, but of course the Bible has a lot to say about this. Now, one of the best ways you can understand someone's perspective on abortion is by asking, how do they talk about the child? Pro-abortion people might call it a blob of cells or a fetus or a parasite, and pro-life people are more likely to call it a baby or a child. Well, that is exactly how the Bible describes unborn children. It says that when John the Baptist was a baby in the womb, and it uses the Greek word brephos, it says John the Baptist leapt for joy at the coming of Jesus, who was also an unborn child. And it uses the exact same word, brephos, for the unborn child, John the Baptist, as for the born child, Jesus, when he's born in the manger. And so the Bible portrays complete continuity between a child in the womb and a child outside the womb. And it says both of these are children. Later in Luke's gospel, it even says they were bringing infants to Jesus that he might touch them. And the disciples tell them to go away because Jesus is too important. But Jesus says, let the children come to me and do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of God. Now, the same word again is used, brephos, the Greek word for child. And so the unborn child is part of this group called children that Jesus says the kingdom of God belongs to such as them. And of course, we heard just in the opening introduction, Psalm 139, which talks so powerfully about the unborn child being created by God. But just in particular, I want to highlight a verse that says, your eyes saw my unformed substance. What that means is that even before the child had a shape, even before it looked like a baby, in the very earliest stage of pregnancy, God still saw that child. So it doesn't make a distinction between early pregnancy and late pregnancy. It says from the very beginning, when the child still didn't even look like a baby, God saw them and had written the days planned for them. And so from the very beginning, Christians had 2 responses to abortion. They said, firstly, we have to give legal protection for the child. So in the Roman Empire, abortion was completely legal and infanticide was also legal. And Christians said babies matter, whether they're born or not. they have to be protected. And so one of the first things Christians did when they got political influence was to prohibit abortion and infanticide together, because they said these are the same thing. But at the same time, they also said we have to provide practically with practical love for the mother and the child in that situation if they have a difficult situation. And so Christians were known for being the people who would look after the mothers, look after the children, and even adopt the children if they were abandoned. And so the Bible presented this pattern that Christians followed that said they have to have legal protection for the child as well as the mother, and we also have to provide practically for both of them. And the pro-life movement is incomplete without either of these responses. So I want to talk about some of the ways that abortion is harmful to women. And there are many ways that I don't have time to talk about, but I want to give you just a few today. So the first is sex-selective abortion, which means that an abortion takes place just because the baby is a girl. If the baby was a boy, they would be allowed to live, but the parents do not want a baby girl, and so they have an abortion. It's now estimated that there are 2 million sex-selective abortions around the world every single year. So over just 10 years, that is 20 million missing women and girls because of abortion. Now, there are many, many more abortions in general, but these are just the abortions on sexist justifications. And so what this means is that abortion has become one of the most powerful weapons to eradicate the voice and the visibility and even the presence of women in society. Now, this has downstream consequences. In some villages in India, there are no baby girls born. They have baby boys, but they do not have baby girls. And so as a result, the men traffic and kidnap women to bring them to the villages so that they have people to have families with. Of course, this is wrong. This is exploitation. This is human trafficking, but it is a consequence of sex-selective abortion. So even the girls and women who survive this experience then become the victims of trafficking as a result. The second way that abortion is harmful to women is because it is so often forced on a woman by somebody else. So it's estimated that around a quarter of abortions are forced on a woman by somebody else, their parent, their partner, a pimp or abuser, sometimes even the doctor or the abortion provider, and sometimes their employer. In fact, studies show that most women having abortions say that they were under pressure from something or someone. They say that I had to have an abortion because otherwise I would have lost my job, or I would have lost my relationship, or I would have run out of money. So there's often this narrative that this is about choice, but the reality is much more complicated. Most women having abortions feel that they have no real choice, because if they did have a real choice, they would keep their baby and they would want to do that. In fact, we know that abortion providers themselves pressure women to have abortions. This is a hospital regulator report from one of the main abortion providers in the world, but this clinic was in the UK. And they found that staff were paid bonuses if women had more abortions. So the clinic set a target that 98 to 100% of women entering the clinic should have an abortion. And their staff were paid bonuses if the women had more abortions. And so you can see that however well-intentioned abortion advocates were when they argued for abortion in the first place, there will always be people that will make a profit from abortion and will exploit the abortion desire to make money from it. And this is a huge industry of millions and millions of dollars all across the world. This was one example from a hospital in the UK just a few years ago. This was a woman in her 20s, and she was 22 weeks pregnant. So if she had given birth at that exact moment, the baby could have survived, potentially. But because the woman had a learning difficulty, the doctors said you have to have an abortion against your wishes. So the woman refused because she was pro-life, she was Catholic, and the woman's family refused because they were all Catholic, they were capable of taking care of a baby. The woman's mother was a midwife who was very well trained in looking after young children. But the doctors said, we're going to take you to court to force you to have an abortion. And they said, instead of your baby, we will give you a new doll, muñeca, to play with instead. And so the court judged that although the woman wanted to have the baby, she should still have an abortion against her consent. Now, this judge used to be one of the leading lawyers for the UK's largest abortion provider. So this is a mentality at the very heart of the abortion industry, which is that it is not really about women's choice. It is about promoting abortion and making money from that, especially for women who are disabled. Now, the third way that abortion is harmful to women is the impact on a woman's mental health. This was the world's leading researcher on the topic. He was a New Zealand professor of psychology, and he was pro-choice. He said abortion is a woman's right and it should be legal. But he said we have to be honest about the scientific evidence. And he said at the present time, there exists no credible scientific evidence demonstrating that abortion has mental health benefits. In fact, he said the opposite. He said if a woman has an abortion, she has a 30% increased risk of anxiety, a 70% increased risk of suicidal behavior, a 130% increased risk of alcohol abuse, and a 300% increased risk of drug abuse. Now, what's most interesting is that one of the government committees on abortion of the New Zealand government, when they heard that he was going to publish his data, they asked him not to publish it in case pro-lifers found out about it. So you can see that there is so much academic censorship of anything that might be critical of abortion, even if the author supports abortion. And this is why there has been such a hijacking of the academia and of medical professionals to support abortion. It is often because the evidence is censored. Well, what about a woman who doesn't have an abortion, but who wanted to get an abortion? Well, there was a study in the US over the last 10 years that studied women who went to get an abortion and they were denied because they were too far along in their pregnancy. So what they found was that most of those women who could not get an abortion ended up keeping their baby. They could have had an illegal abortion, they could have gone to another state or another country, but 70% of them had the baby. And so this proves, beyond any reasonable doubt, that pro-life laws do work. They do save lives. One of the most common talking points to legalize abortion is that pro-life laws do not stop abortions, but the clear scientific evidence is that they do. They do not prevent all abortions, but they do prevent the large majority of abortions. And so they have a clear purpose and they achieve that purpose quite successfully. Well, the study authors were pro-abortion, and so they wanted to know how damaged the woman would be by being refused an abortion and by having to have the baby. And so they studied these women for 5 years afterwards, and they asked them at the end, do you wish you could still have had an abortion? And 98% of the women said no. 98% said, I do not wish I had an abortion anymore. I'm glad I have my baby. I'm happy with my baby. And therefore, this shows that what women really need in this situation is not abortion, but time and support and compassionate care. Now, because suicide is one of the leading causes of maternal death, we know that the mortality rate overall is highest after an abortion. So a woman who is not pregnant has an average suicide rate. A woman who becomes pregnant has a much lower suicide rate because pregnancy and having a child are protective against suicide. But women who have abortions have over twice the average rate of suicide. And the same pattern is true of mortality overall. So women who get pregnant have a lower risk of mortality, but women who have abortions have a higher risk of dying within a year compared to women who become pregnant or compared to women who do not get pregnant at all. So many people will say that abortion is safer than having a baby, but this is not true when you look at the mortality statistics overall. We know that abortion has other complications, both immediate complications like hemorrhage or infection, but also long-term complications. We know that it causes a significant increase in preterm birth in future pregnancies, and preterm birth is the leading cause of death for young children around the world. So this has a huge cost in lives, it has a huge cost to the healthcare system, and a huge economic cost both from the neonatal costs and from disability that might arise as a result of preterm birth. So thousands of children are born early in the US and around the world each year because of a previous abortion that the mother had or was forced upon her. And so finally, in terms of the problems for women, we have a problem that results from cultural change when abortion is legalized. Now, this is a bit more complex, so please bear with me. When abortion is legalized, people have a lot more sex with a lot more people because they feel like they have a backup insurance option if they get pregnant. So instead of avoiding sex because they're scared of pregnancy, they have sex because they know they can have an abortion. And so what this means is that there is a massive increase in sexually transmitted diseases. So sexually transmitted diseases are a huge public health problem across the Western world, and a large part of this is because abortion was legalized. Now, of course, many of these conditions affect women particularly badly. Gonorrhea, for example, causes pelvic inflammatory disease, ectopic pregnancies, miscarriage, preterm birth, and so on. HPV causes cervical cancer. HIV/AIDS, of course, affects both women and men, but causes death in the long run if it's not sufficiently treated. And so this causes huge health problems and problems for maternal mortality in particular. But there's another thing that happens when abortion is legalized and there is a lot more free sex. This is that men have a lot more sex and they can just walk away from the consequences. So if a man gets a woman pregnant, he says it is your body, it's your choice, and therefore it's your problem, and I have nothing to do with this. If parenthood is optional for you, then parenthood is optional for me, and I'm choosing to not be a parent. And so he walks away, he can earn as much money as he wants, he can have as many relationships as he wants, he can go out whenever he wants. He has no consequences from this sex, and he is completely liberated with no responsibility or duties. Now, that was the promise that they gave to women. They said, if we allow abortion, then you can have all of these things as well. But that is not the reality, because all the women get pregnant and many of them do not want abortions. And so every woman is the person who deals with the consequences and is left to pick up the pieces by herself. She has no support from the man at all. She is the one who deals with it financially, economically, physically, emotionally, and in every other way. And so she has to go through a traumatic abortion by herself, or she has to raise the child by herself. And so the man is completely liberated by abortion, and the women actually become more trapped than beforehand because they have the same problem, only they have it worse, and they have to deal with it by themselves. And so it has been shown that this has been a huge cause of female poverty since abortion was legalized. Abortion was legalized, and that meant that women went into poverty because they were left by themselves in these situations, whereas previously the man would usually take some responsibility. Now, this family breakdown has many, many consequences, not only poverty for the woman and for the child in particular, and huge inequality as a result, particularly among ethnic minorities. It also causes mental health problems for the mother and the father and the child. And family breakdown also means that the father and the child are more likely to be involved in crime and violence and drug abuse as they get older. So it causes many ripple effects throughout the whole of society. And so I want to finish just by sharing some statistics about abortion and also about the child themselves. As I said, in the UK, there are 200,000 abortions every year, which is 1 in 4 pregnancies. That means 1 in 3 women have an abortion in their lifetime. Now, only 2% of these are because the child has a disability. Only 0.01% or lower are because there is a risk to the woman's life. And data from Florida suggests that about 0.1% are because the mother was a victim of sexual violence. So 98% of abortions are actually for social or economic reasons. They're not because of one of those extreme situations. In the UK, abortion is legal for any reason up to 6 months, and legal if the baby has a disability up until birth or even during birth. Other countries with similar laws include the UK, Colombia, Canada, Singapore, Netherlands, etc. So these laws become extremely radical. So how can we think about this from an ethical perspective? Well, it's a helpful place to begin with international human rights law, because international human rights law says that every human being has the inherent right to life. It doesn't say some human beings. It doesn't say rich human beings or white human beings or men or anything else. It says every human being has the right to life. And then it doesn't say that this is an ideal that we should aspire to. It says that this right shall be protected by law. So you have to protect this in law. So the question fundamentally is the embryo or the fetus a human being? We're not talking about a potential human being. We're not talking about a future human being. We are asking, is this an actual human being? And this is a scientific question. The word biology literally means the study of life. So biology can tell us when life begins and what counts as a human being, an individual human organism. And just to be, just to be clear, that is what we're talking about. Because bacteria are alive, but they don't have a right to life. Skin cells are alive, and they might even be human, but they don't have a right to life. The thing which has a right to life is one of us, which means a human being, an individual member of Homo sapiens, or an individual organism in the human family. That is what we're talking about, to be clear and precise. And so scientists can answer that question. This was a survey from the US just a few years ago, where he asked the public, who is the expert on when life begins? And 80% said biologists. This is a biological question. So he then asked 5,000 biologists, when does an individual human organism begin to exist? And he found that 95% said that life begins at fertilization. 95%. He even asked them about their views about abortion. And even the people who counted themselves very pro-choice, 70% of those still said that life begins at fertilization. So this is really not controversial among doctors or biologists. It is a scientific fact that life begins at fertilization. So when you say this and when you protect that child, you are not imposing your religion on anyone else. You are just stating a scientific fact and basic human rights law. And of course, that is why the Hippocratic Oath from the very beginning of medicine has explicitly prohibited abortion, as did modern variations of the Hippocratic Oath until recently. So I want to close just by sharing some landmarks about fetal development in the womb. So none of these define the beginning of life, but they do show just how quickly the baby develops. And they show that from the very beginning, this is a growing, developing, living human being. So at just 2.5 weeks, at 16 days, the baby's heart begins to beat and pump blood around the body, which means that by the end of just 4 weeks, the heart has already beaten 1,000,000 times. And your heart beating in your chest right now has been beating every second since then. At 4 to 5 weeks, the baby begins to move by herself. At 6 weeks, you can measure coordinated brainwaves in the baby with microelectrodes. At 7 weeks, the baby can hiccup and suck and swallow, and they have taste buds. At 8 weeks, the baby begins to practice breathing, and at 9 weeks, the baby begins to yawn as well. At 10 weeks, the baby can begin to feel pain, but some scientists think that it might be even earlier than that, and there's still research on this question. And at 12 weeks, the babies can interact with each other. Now, how would you know this? This is very difficult to discover, but they know this because babies in the womb move their arms around all the time. And when they move their hands near their eyes or their face, they slow down to protect their face. Now, what they've found is that when there are twin babies in the womb, the twin babies move their hands around, and when they move towards their twin's face or body, they slow down to protect their twin brother or sister. This is amazing, at just 12 weeks after fertilization. At 14 weeks, if you sing the baby a song, then the baby will actually move their mouth and tongue in response and try to sing along. And at 15 weeks, the baby can taste food that the mother has eaten. And later in pregnancy, they can even learn that food. And so they prefer to eat that food after they are born. So it's a very practical tip. If you want your baby to like a particular food, you have to eat it during pregnancy, and it's more likely that the baby will like it. As another practical tip, the babies remember songs and music after birth, and they prefer that music, and they're more likely to stop crying. So if you want your baby to like a particular musician, if you want them to like Hillsong, you have to listen to Hillsong when you're pregnant, and it's more likely that they will. The babies even learn to recognize their mother's voice in the womb and her accent and her language. And so there's a study showing that when French babies are born, they immediately cry in a French accent. And German babies cry in a German accent as soon as they are born because they pick up the beginning of the accent in the womb. Perhaps most incredibly, the babies produce stem cells to repair their mother's body. So the baby is sometimes portrayed as a parasite that is taking from the mother and not giving anything back. But the reality of biology is very different, that this is a symbiotic relationship between the mother and the child. So just 2 to 3 weeks into the pregnancy, the baby sends stem cells around the mother which heal her from diseases. They can help to heal the heart after a heart attack or the liver after hepatitis. They protect against breast cancer, and they seem to also protect against Alzheimer's disease as well. Most incredibly, they even become part of the mother's brain, which means that for many women who have had a baby or even had a stillbirth or miscarriage, for the rest of their life, they will still have part of their unborn baby in their brain thinking with them and thinking their thoughts for the rest of their life. Some people say that this is why women are more intelligent than men, but I think they're still researching that question. But it's a plausible explanation. So finally, I want to share some pictures and videos from medical school. So this is a baby at 9 weeks in the womb. This is a baby at 11 weeks. And this is a baby at 18 weeks. This is a baby at 20 weeks. So you can see even the markings of the brain. You can see the ventricles inside the brain. In my country, it is legal to have an abortion at this stage of pregnancy for any reason. If you decide this is a baby girl and I wanted a baby boy, you can have an abortion in my country for this reason. I think also in Colombia and certainly in much of the United States and in Canada. So you notice that the baby jumps halfway through. This is, you remember in Luke's gospel where it says that John the Baptist was jumping in the womb. So this could be a video of John the Baptist, but it's unconfirmed. This is a baby that is going to feel a bit of pain from an injection. Now, this baby is okay. They're not being aborted. They're having an injection because they're having surgery. You can now do surgery during pregnancy on the baby. But to do that, you give an anesthetic injection, and you can see that the baby cries as a result. This is just 23 weeks. So again, at this point in my country, you can have an abortion for any reason. This is the same, but it's clearer as a video. So now you can see the baby begin to cry as soon as the injection goes in. And so clearly the baby is capable of feeling this pain. And so this is a baby at about 30 weeks of pregnancy, and you can see that they're able to feel pain. Now, many people will say that that is towards the end of pregnancy, but in early pregnancy, it's just an embryo and it's not really human. And so I want to close by showing you some videos from the first trimester. So this is a baby at just 7 weeks.
By 6.5 weeks, the elbows are distant.
And you can see the heart beating, you can see the eyes, and you can see the fingers beginning to separate. This is a baby at 8 weeks. You can see the tongue in the mouth. And you can see the fingers and the toes. And this is a baby at 9 weeks. And you can see at the end that the baby covers their face with their hands. And the reason for this is that they're very shy and they don't like the media taking pictures of them. This is the reality of the first trimester. So when people say maybe abortion is okay at the beginning of pregnancy, or when people say that 90% of abortions are in the first trimester, this is still the reality. This is clearly a living human being. So thank you so much for your time today. I know you're all busy people, but as I say, this is a particularly important issue in Latin America at the moment. So what I want to say is that it is hugely important that you are part of this battle, and it's important that you don't give up. If you're in a country like Argentina or Colombia or Cuba or Mexico, where usually the judges have forced abortion on your country against the democratic consensus, it is not too late. Don't give up. You have to keep going because these are lives and thousands or millions of lives which are at stake. So please, if I can help you prepare for that, if I can help you to speak about this and to advocate, I'd be very happy to do that. I'll be in Costa Rica in January, if any of you are from Costa Rica. And I do travel to Latin America maybe once or twice a year. So please do let me know if you'd like me to help work with you. So thank you so much. And I'd love to spend some time answering some questions. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, doctor Miller. Muchas gracias a Haniel y a Megan por la traducción. Y quisiera saber si le pueden traducir. Hay 3 preguntas en este momento. La primera pregunta es la que está ahí en la pantalla. Pregunta allí, ¿cómo se puede apoyar para abordar el duelo a una mujer que se hace un aborto y tiene sentimientos de culpa, lo cual afecta su parte mental y emocional, como muy bien lo vimos en la presentación? Si Haniel nos colabora o Megan haciendo
Yes,
la
thank you.
traducción del
It's a
doctor
great question.
Miller.
As I said, this is a very common experience. And so there are many women who are grieving the loss of their child as a result. I think one of the best things you can do is put them in touch with people who are professionals and who do this either full time or have experience volunteering with this. So there are many organizations around the world which work for post abortion healing. There's one organization in many countries called Rachel's Vineyard. And I was in Dominican Republic maybe a month ago, and they had Rachel's Vineyard in the Dominican Republic. They're probably in other countries in Latin America as well. And so I would first try and direct someone to one of these organizations with experience in that. If you want to say something yourself, I think the most important thing to begin with is just to listen. Listen and tell them that you will not judge them, you will not condemn them, but you will be there to listen to what they've been through and then to try and help them to heal from it. And that they can share anything with you, and you will go through that with them as a friend and as someone that cares for them and wants to see them be healed and to be taken care of. So I think the most important thing is to show that you care for them. And then you can begin to think, how can we help after listening to their situation? And then is there someone with more experience who could help to work through these emotions with them? Because I think that would be the most helpful thing that you could do in that situation.
Hay una segunda pregunta. ¿Cómo concientizar a nuestras generaciones a tener claridad que la vida inicia en la concepción, como lo hemos visto con estos videos? Claro, algunas personas dicen que hasta que no tenga registro civil no hace parte de los seres humanos y no hay vida. La pregunta es cómo concientizar a la generación.
Exactly. So I think it's not easy to do this with just one simple strategy. It really takes everyone to help educate on this. So I think that one of the most important things to do is to be equipped with the facts and the videos and the pictures. So if you take the facts and the pictures and videos from my presentation, you can share those with others and share them as widely as possible. I think the next question is how to do this. Where do you go? Well, I think you need to go to schools, to hospitals, to churches, any organization where you can get people together and equip and educate them. And you need to give talks and speak to the leaders of those communities to encourage them to educate with these facts and statistics and the videos as well. So it's really important that you train people that can speak publicly on this. If you need help with that, then I can help to do training for public speakers. And then they can, in turn, train a load of other speakers. And so, what you really need eventually is to have 100 different people equipped to share this kind of presentation, and then to go into as many schools and churches and hospitals and other groups as possible. So it really is a big effort with a lot of people. And so the key thing is training up a lot of people who can give this kind of presentation, but particularly to focus on the younger generation who might be more misled by the culture or by social media. As I say, it's really important that you get the good resources. Don't just say life begins at conception. Show them the pictures, show them the videos, give them the statistics, tell them about the survey that 95% of biologists agree with this. They really need to have a firm grasp of this with good evidence, and that is what can help them to change their mind.
Muchas gracias por la respuesta, doctor Miller. Qué bueno poder ser capacitados y créame, yo sería el primero que estuviera ahí en esa lista, pues es de mucho interés concientizar a nuestras generaciones, más cuando el principio de la vida vale hoy tan poco. Y hay una tercera pregunta. Los activistas pro aborto niegan el síndrome posaborto, que presentan muchas mujeres después de realizarse un aborto. La pregunta, ¿cómo podemos presentar de una manera racional y científica las consecuencias de un aborto en una mujer?
It's a good question. The first thing I would say is avoid the terminology of post-abortion syndrome. I agree that it's a thing and it refers to a real phenomenon, but by using that term, it becomes very easy for people to say that term is not a widely recognized medical condition, it's not an official medical condition, and people might be persuaded by that. But so what you can say is the statistics with recognized medical conditions. And the closest thing to post-abortion syndrome is probably post-traumatic stress disorder. So there are many studies, and you can find these on PubMed, you can find these in all the medical literature, many of them published by pro-abortion researchers, that look at post-traumatic stress disorder among women having abortions. And estimates range. Some people say it's only 2%, other people have said up to 30%, I think some even say higher. But there are very good quality studies on PubMed by pro-abortion researchers that show that a certain percentage of women who have abortions develop post-traumatic stress disorder as a result. Now, you cannot say that this is from some other event, because post-traumatic stress disorder has symptoms which are specific to the trauma. You have flashbacks of the particular event or the place. You avoid the place where it happened. You avoid people in similar situations, like avoiding pregnant women. So there's a very clear and uncontroversial causal relationship between the abortion and the development of these symptoms. But rather than calling it post-abortion syndrome, you should call it post-traumatic stress disorder specific to the abortion. And no one can refute that. No one can possibly deny that this is a phenomenon. And then if you want to talk about other conditions, I would try and find the best quality evidence. So if you go to my website, calumsblog.com, there you will find a complete question and answer section about abortion. And one of the big sections on there is abortion and mental health. And so if you have any questions about the evidence on mental health, you can go there and find a lot of the research. I think one of the big problems is that pro-life people just use any study they can find without looking at the best quality studies. So it's really important that you know who are the top researchers on this question and what does their evidence show. So I would use David Ferguson's study, the person I mentioned earlier. He had a meta-analysis in 2013. He was pro-choice, and everyone agrees that his research is the best research on this topic. So rather than just using any study, use David Ferguson's 2013 study, and that is really difficult to argue against. So those would be the starting points for convincing people that don't believe in the mental health consequences of abortion. Thank you for that question.
Bueno, y hay una cuarta pregunta. La cuarta pregunta dice, ¿cuál es su opinión sobre la Asociación Americana de Psicología? Ellos afirman que la salud mental de la mujer mejora cuando se realiza un aborto.
I haven't seen the American Psychological Association say this. The American Psychological Association did a review of the literature in 2008, where they said that for an adult woman with no psychiatric history, if she has a first trimester abortion, if she has just one first trimester abortion, she is no more likely to have mental health problems. So they don't say that abortion makes things better. They just say that abortion doesn't make the problem worse. Now, there are many problems with this review. One is that it is outdated because it was published in 2008, and the best quality study on this subject actually came out also in 2008, and they did not include it. The second problem is that the review only looks at a minority of women having abortions. They say these are women who are over 18, they only have one abortion, they have an abortion in the first trimester, and they have no psychiatric history. Now, when you qualify the claim with all of those conditions, it actually refers to the minority of abortions. It doesn't say anything about the majority of abortions, which are either in children or in the second trimester, or they're a second or third abortion for the same women, etc. We also know the American Psychological Association is politically motivated. They explicitly say on their website that they support abortion as a woman's right. So they're clearly not unbiased on this issue. And then there are many other methodological issues with their review as well. Those are just some of them. What's interesting is that they said David Ferguson has the second best study on this topic. And they didn't even know about his latest study, which was much better and which solved all of the problems of the first study. So if they were doing the review again now, they would say that Ferguson's study is the best in the world. And that study clearly shows a relationship between abortion and mental health problems. So I'm sorry, I know that that gets quite technical, but since you're mostly healthcare professionals, I hope it wasn't too technical. So there's a lot to say in response to these sorts of claims, which really are just based on censoring the evidence or misrepresenting the evidence.
Bueno, doctor Calum Miller, muchísimas gracias. Creo que nos ha dado una muy buena ilustración, una muy buena motivación de que hay que hacer mucho ante los influjos de este mundo, las nuevas propuestas que hacen sobre el aborto. Alguien pregunta sobre la dirección de su blog. Permítame, yo voy a compartirla para que la tengan allí. Esta es la dirección que yo tengo, calumsblog.com. Entonces, para que ustedes puedan visitarla. En el momento no hay más preguntas, entonces quiero agradecer a Megan por su traducción en español, a Haniel su gran colaboración con todo y su traducción a portugués. Doctor Miller, muchísimas gracias, ha sido una gran bendición, especialmente para mí, y muy motivados a trabajar seguramente en los colegios y algunas otras partes. Muchas gracias, les estaremos recordando de los próximos eventos que tengamos. Doctor Papatiano, doctor Mario.
Muchas gracias. Y lo siento por mi español, es malísimo, pero mi inglés está bueno. Entonces, muchas gracias por su paciencia con la traducción.
Adiós por el tiempo. Han estado en el equipo organizador, que Jorge los ha nombrado, y a otros que seguramente estuvieron detrás también, apoyando este evento con mucho entusiasmo, con mucha responsabilidad, con mucho compromiso les agradecemos a todos. Señor, te agradecemos en esta hora por esta oportunidad que hemos tenido de compartir con nuestro hermano y colega, doctor Müller. Pedimos tu bendición, tu gracia, tu misericordia sobre su vida y sobre cada uno de nosotros, especialmente en Latinoamérica, frente a esta avalancha que a modo de tsunami nos ha llegado ideológicamente para que podamos hacer abortos aquí en esta tierra. Te pedimos, Señor, que a través de tu pueblo puedas impedir, Señor, esta tergiversación, este asesinato que muchos y miles de personas están cometiendo a diario a través de esta práctica. En el futuro puedan continuar a través de nuestras vidas. En el nombre de Jesús. Amén.